Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing today? I hope you're well, hope you're happy, healthy, having some fun. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about very odd looking, somewhat odd behaving, and kind of a mystery to science group of animals. Today we're going to talk about anteaters. Anteaters are referred to as edentates. That's a big scientific word. What it means, they don't have teeth. That's kind of crazy. There's not a lot of mammals out there that don't have teeth. But the anteaters, they make it work. They are native to Central and South America, starting about southern Mexico, going down through the little countries of Central America and throughout most of northern South America, coming down through Brazil, through the Amazon, and then for the giant anteaters and for the tamandua, they come down into Argentina. For the silky anteaters, which we'll talk about more in a minute, they kind of stop midway through the Amazon. So there are different species of anteaters. We'll talk about those more in a moment. Their closest relatives, and I don't know how many of you out there know this, but anteaters' closest relatives, aside from the anteater group, are sloths. And then after sloths, it's armadillos. And all of them are pretty odd. They're all pretty strange. But if you think about an anteater and if you think about a sloth, they don't really resemble each other at all. But if you look at their skeletons and if you look at how they move and how they work throughout the day, they do have a lot in common. So it's pretty interesting. I'll do a future Critter Chat about sloths. There's enough about anteaters I wanted to talk about. I didn't need to get into sloths. And we'll see about armadillos possibly down the road as well. Armadillos seem a little better fit with anteaters, but they're actually a little further related than the sloths are. And part of that has to do with the teeth. But we'll talk about those in other episodes. So anteaters, as their name suggests, specialize in eating ants. That's not all they eat, it's just most of what they eat. They'll also eat termites. Termites are very similar to ants in body size. Ants eat a wide variety of things depending on the species of ant. Termites usually eat wood or other plant matter. They both live in huge colonies. In the tropical areas of the world, those usually look like big mounds. You may have seen that in like cartoons or movies. Here in the United States, we don't see it very much, so we're not very familiar with it. I did see some termite mounds in Africa, which would be very helpful, except anteaters don't live there. So ants and termites live in huge colonies, millions of individuals, and anteaters, all species of anteaters, specialize in eating ants, termites, and occasionally some other things. So with the giant anteaters, they will also eat some soft fruits, things like bananas and avocados, and occasionally honey. The tamanduas will also eat some of those, although they get theirs in different places. And the silky anteaters will also eat a wide variety of other insects that they can find. With all three of those main species, the giant, the tamandua, and the silky anteaters, they all have very long, very sticky tongues that move very fast. Their tongue can best be described as like a long noodle, like a spaghetti noodle, except it's a little more rigid. And it moves in and out of their mouth extremely fast and is very sticky. And with that, they're able to catch a lot of ants or termites in a single movement of the tongue. The tongues also have these little tiny spines that kind of face backwards on them. So as it goes into the termite or ant mound, it's really sticky, so it grabs the ants, and then as it pulls back out, those little barbs kind of keep those ants or termites in place, and helps them to be able to eat a large number of the little insects in a short amount of time. The tongue of a giant anteater, somebody counted, and it can move in and out of its mouth so fast that it goes 150 times in and out of its mouth in 1 minute. So very, very fast tongue that gives them the ability to eat a lot of bugs in a short amount of time. Now, as I mentioned, there's kind of three main groups of anteaters, or main species. The giant anteater, that's the one that I pictured earlier today on Facebook and Instagram. That's probably the species most of us are most familiar with. Although they're odd animals, many of us may have never seen them or know much about them. The middle-sized one is called a tamandua. And there's two species of tamandua. They're separated geographically. So there's a northern tamandua, sometimes called the Mexican tamandua, and then the southern tamandua. As their name suggests, they live north and south of each other. And then there's the littlest one, which is called a silky anteater. And for a long time, scientists just considered it one species with lots of subspecies. And within the last 3 or 4 years, they've done more genetic testing on these very rare and elusive critters. And they decided that each of the different subspecies is now a full species. So now there are 7 species of silky anteaters. I have never even seen a silky anteater. I've only seen photos of them and a little bit of video. I'll see if I can find some video that I can share with you. Tamandua and giant anteater I'm a little more familiar with. So let's talk about these individual species. Giant anteaters, it's one species. They live from the very southern tip of Mexico down into northern Argentina. So throughout that range, they live in a variety of habitats. So some of that is going to be grassland. Some of it's going to be kind of the lower elevations of mountains. Some of that's going to be rainforest. Some of it's going to be wetlands, kind of swampy areas with lots of water all over the ground. So they are pretty adaptable to a wide variety of things, but it kind of needs to be in that zone. There's a good reason for that, and that reason is that anteaters, both tamanduas and giant anteaters, have really low body temperatures for mammals. It's about 91 degrees. Humans are usually between 96 and 97 degrees. And so anteaters kind of live in warmer places where they're not going to get too cold, and it's going to be easier for them to maintain that temperature. They assume that they have a lower body temperature because the food that they eat, ants, doesn't have a lot of calories, and so they have to eat a lot of them anyway just to get the nutrition they do receive, and it would be really hard for them to have a higher running metabolism and higher body temperature, and to maintain that would cost them a lot more food that they would need to eat. With the giant anteaters, they are listed as vulnerable. That's over their whole range. In some areas, they're actually very, very endangered. They're considered the most threatened mammal in Central America, or the most threatened large mammal in Central America. They are already extinct in Belize, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, and then in South America in the country of Uruguay. So in some places they have disappeared entirely. The biggest reason for that is habitat loss, and we'll talk about that a little more in a moment. But they are listed as vulnerable, and their overall population is decreasing. So their numbers continue to go down. Giant anteaters can eat about 30,000 ants or termites in a day. But they only spend about a minute or 2 at each ant mound or termite mound that they come across. So they kind of move a lot throughout their day looking for different termite mounds. There's 2 reasons they stay a short time. One, they don't want to eat too many at one time, because then it might cause the colony to collapse, and then they would have to find a whole new food source. So they know that just eat a little bit every day, come back, eat a little bit more the next day. That way the ants can continue to repopulate, and there's always going to be ants there. Second reason, they're not immune to ant bites. So if they're only there a short amount of time, once the ants kind of start fighting back and biting the anteater and come out of the mound and start climbing on its face, it's like, whoa, I gotta go. And it will leave the area. I thought that was pretty interesting. I always wondered how they did that. If you've ever been around ants or played with ants at all, especially as a kid, I did. I remember getting bit really, really bad on my hands because I was digging in their hole and I made them mad and they started fighting back, and it wasn't very fun. So anteaters have learned the same lesson. If they stay too long in one spot, it's gonna start to hurt. With anteaters, they have really good senses of smell and really good sense of hearing. That's important for them. Their eyes are kind of small and their eyes are kind of on the side of their head, so they don't always see what's going on around them very well, but they can hear it really well, and they can definitely smell it. They assume that anteaters have a sense of smell 40 times better than humans, which is impressive, but there's other animals with way better senses of smell. Most dogs even have a better sense of smell than that. For sure, other animals like grizzly bears have incredible senses of smell. I think that it's 100 times better than humans. But anteaters have a really good sense of smell, and they can figure out what species of ant lives where, because there's a couple that they won't mess with. Ants with really big pinchers and ants that have chemical sting to their bite, they won't even mess with those. They'll go after the other ones. On the giant anteater, their tongue is about 24 inches long. That's 2 feet. So even though they already have a really long nose and mouth, their tongue can go 24 inches outside of that. So it's incredibly long and can definitely reach very far into an ant or termite mound. So anteaters, as you may have seen in the photo I posted earlier, giant anteaters are kind of grayish color with kind of lighter color underneath, a dark stripe up the side, and a big bushy tail. With that, their body is about 40 inches to 48 inches long, so up to 4 feet just their body, and then their tail is almost another 3 feet. So total tip of the nose to tip of the tail, they can be 7 feet long. So they're a pretty good sized animal. Giant anteater is a good name for them. They can weigh anywhere between 60 and 140 pounds. That's a pretty big variation. Some giant anteaters in some areas are going to be a little bigger than others, depending on where they live and what they do. It's going to fluctuate. And the males are also a little bit bigger than the females. They have very coarse hair. It was described in one of the things I was reading as feeling like straw. I have touched a giant anteater, and I would agree with that. I think it feels more kind of like a broom bristle, but it's very coarse hair. That helps them in areas where it rains a lot, which is most of their range. It helps funnel the rain off of their bodies really well. They're also incredibly good swimmers, and so when they get out of the water, it helps the water to run off their bodies, which is important because they have that low body temperature. That way they're not going to get too cold too fast. Giant anteaters walk kind of slow and kind of funny. This is part of their way of walking because on their front feet, they have super long claws on their digits. The biggest claw is about 4 inches long. That's pretty big. It's about the size of a grizzly bear claw. And they use that claw for tearing open the termite and ant mounds to make a good hole so they can put their tongue into the mound. But they want to keep those claws nice and sharp. So instead of walking directly on them, and they can't retract their claws or make them go back in like a cat, they kind of walk on the sides of their foot. So their claws, if my fingers are their claws, they kind of curl those up and then walk on the sides of their feet. And that gives them kind of a really awkward looking walk, and they're pretty slow moving. That sometimes is a problem for them if they live around people and if they live around roads. Car accidents with giant anteaters is a big part of their problem in populated areas. With the giant anteaters, they are usually active during the daytime. They're usually solitary, so you don't really see them together much. Males and females will find each other through that great sense of smell. And then their breeding season is between March and May. And then the gestation or pregnancy lasts 190 days. So that's a little longer than 6 months. When the baby is born, it's about 3 pounds. And right away, it looks pretty much like the adults, except it's kind of very lazy and can't walk very well. So it hitches a ride on top of its mom's back. And the position that it lays in on the mom's back, its little black stripe lines up perfectly with its mom's black stripe, and that helps it to blend in really well with the mom. That way predators can't really detect, oh, there's a baby on that one, that might be an easier meal. It also helps make the mom look even bigger, and anteaters have a pretty good defense against predators. If they're cornered by something big that's being mean to them, like a big cat, like a jaguar or a mountain lion, both of which live throughout much of their range, the anteater can kind of lean back and use its big tail as a tripod leg, and it will stand on its 2 hind legs and its tail, and then with those big sharp claws, it can slash at a cat that may be trying to get it. So they're pretty good at defending themselves when they're an adult. Babies, unfortunately, do have a lot of predators that would go after them. So they try to stay on their mom's back when they're really little, and then once they start moving around on their own, they stay pretty close to mom, because there's also some eagles there in South America that are big enough that they would go after them as well. Okay. Oh, and with the giant anteaters, their life expectancy is between 10 and 14 years in the wild. They can live a little longer, maybe closer to 20 in a zoo setting. And one thing that I read, I don't know more about why this is the case, but the males of giant anteaters live significantly longer than the females do, which I don't really understand why. I'll have to see if I can find out more about that. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Their major threats, like I mentioned, are habitat loss, particularly in Central America. That has been because they are cutting down the forest and growing crops. Things like coffee, sugarcane, bananas are the big things that are being grown in those areas. So we can all help out. If you drink coffee, try to buy coffee that is called shade-grown coffee. That's where they plant coffee plants underneath some of the other big trees, and they allow the natural landscape to still exist as they also grow coffee in that area. It also makes your coffee taste a little better. It's not quite as bitter, has a little sweeter taste to it. So it's a win-win if you like to drink coffee. Buy shade-grown coffee. That can help out anteaters and other animals from the rainforest area. So let's move on and talk about tamanduas. I think that's a fun word. It's a fun name. I don't really know what it means. They are sometimes also called lesser anteaters. They're about half the size of the giant anteaters, and they're more tan and yellow in color with a little bit of a stripe on them as well. Like I mentioned earlier, there's 2 species of them, northern up in Mexico and Central America, and a little bit into South America, and then the southern species, which is the one that lives like in the Amazon rainforest and down into northern Argentina. With the tamanduas, they can eat 9,000 ants in a day, or termites, and their tongue is 16 inches long. So just like their bigger cousin, they're kind of the same thing, but on a smaller scale. So a smaller tongue, eat less ants. Unlike their bigger cousins, they spend a decent amount of time up in the trees. So they can climb trees really well. They also have, instead of a brush-like tail that's really hairy, their tail's very skinny and very strong. It's almost like a rope. And at the end of it, there's no fur on the underside. And they can wrap their tail around a branch to help hold on. That's called a prehensile tail. So they can grab with their tail. That helps them to balance really well if they get up high into a tree or out on a skinny branch. Up in the trees, they'll find termite nest and ant nest as well. There are a lot of species of termites and ants in South America that live up in trees. And they'll come down from the trees and move over to another section of trees. But up in the trees, they're also safer from predators. These guys are smaller, so they're a little more vulnerable to predators. They do still have the big claws, not quite as big as the giant ones, but they'll use those claws to open things as well. The tamanduas also have another defense. Both the giant and the tamanduas have scent glands, but with the tamanduas, it's much more potent. Some people have said it's 4 times more powerful than a skunk spray, and so it's apparently very stinky kind of all the time, and then they can spray their predators to warn them off as well. What else? Oh, their size. So their body length is between 20 and about 30 inches in length, with another 15 to 25 inch long tail. So total length, that tail's big long tail, can be about 5 feet or so. When the babies are born there, it's a 5-month gestation or pregnancy, so a little bit shorter than the giant anteater. And those babies are born just under a pound in weight, so they're pretty small babies. They don't have quite as well developed fur as their giant anteater cousins do, but they also will ride on their mom's back when they're babies, and they'll stay riding on their mom's back until they're pretty good size, probably more than half the weight of their mom before they walk around on their own. The adults can weigh between 5 and 17 pounds, so again, a pretty big weight distribution there, big range of weights. And they also tend to be more nocturnal, so they're a little more active at nighttime. They are super cool looking animals. I'll share some really great video and further information about tamanduas later. They are listed as least concern, so they're not threatened with being endangered at all, neither of the species, so that's very good news. With the little guys, so those are the silky anteaters. They used to think it was 1 species, now it's 7 species. That just changed in the last 3 or 4 years. That's one thing I really love about science, is we've learned more about genetic testing. We're able to use that across the board with all sorts of different species. And so silky anteaters are pretty elusive. People don't see them very often, so we didn't know a lot about them anyway. So it was just recently that they did genetic testing on them and found out that there's a bunch of different species. Silky anteaters are almost strictly arboreal or tree dwelling. They're pretty small, so their body is only about 8 inches, and then their tail is about 9 inches, and their tail curls up quite a bit, and it can also grab hold of things. So it's also a prehensile tail. They really use it a lot because they pretty much stay in the trees all the time. They get their moisture they need from licking the dew off of leaves, and that's probably why they don't go as far south in their range. So they don't live in the grasslands of South America, they just live in the rainforest area of South America and Central America. They don't carry their babies. So when their babies are born, their babies are little tiny, but mom makes a little nest in a tree. She'll pad that with some leaves. She'll tuck her baby in the little nest. She'll go off hunting. She's also looking for ants and termites. They can eat about 5,000 ants or termites in a day. So same sort of setup, a little shorter mouth and a shorter tongue. I didn't get a measurement on how long their tongue is, but they're just little tiny guys, so I would imagine their tongue is probably only a couple of inches as well. But the mom would leave the baby in the nest until it's big enough to follow her around. Our special shout out today, we don't always have one of those, but today we do, is a project in Argentina called the Iberia Project. Iberia is a region in northern Argentina, kind of northeastern Argentina, and it used to be an area where they used the land a lot for different agricultural reasons. They would raise cows on it, they would grow crops on it. But the kind of crazy thing is that area of Argentina floods quite a bit during certain times of the year. So it's not real great for growing crops, other than it gets a lot of water, but sometimes too much. And it's sometimes a little tricky to raise cows there because you had to get the cows out before it flooded. Otherwise, the cows could be swept away in the flood and it could cause all sorts of problems. Now it's a conservation organization and it's a national park. And so there's a specific project called the Iberia Project that works in and around Iberia National Park. And what they've managed to do is they've set up a rescue and rehabilitation program for giant anteaters in Argentina. I mentioned earlier that giant anteaters sometimes get hit by cars. Well, if that's a mom with a baby on her back, sometimes she gets hit by the car, but the baby's still alive, but the mom unfortunately dies. And this Iberia Project has set up an orphanage where they'll take in the baby giant anteaters and raise them and then help rehabilitate them so that they know how to be a giant anteater and can go back out into the wild. And around 2007, they started reintroducing them into Iberia National Park, and they have since created at least 4 different release areas in there, and they have released over 150 rehabilitated baby giant anteaters back out into this national park over the last around 15 years or so. So they're doing a lot of really great work, and I'll share some more information about them later on today. As always, I like to talk a little bit about my experiences. I have been at 2 different zoos, actually 3. When I was a volunteer at Hogle Zoo in Salt Lake City, they had giant anteaters for part of the time. I worked with monkeys, so I never really saw the giant anteaters much unless I went and wandered the zoo. During my time at the Phoenix Zoo, we did have giant anteaters on exhibit, and the Phoenix Zoo had a really good breeding program for years and years with giant anteaters, and I was there at the end of that breeding program before their adult anteaters were too old to have babies anymore. So I was there during the last 2 babies that were born there. I think they have new ones having new babies now. I'm not for sure because I've been gone from that area for 7 years. But during my time there, I did get to see some baby anteaters riding on their mom's back. I also got to go up with one of their keepers and have a special encounter with an anteater where I got to hand feed one of the adults. It was super, super cool. We didn't feed it ants. I told you earlier they eat some other things, so we fed them bananas. And the way you would do that is you just hold a banana like this, and the giant anteater would stick his tongue in between your fingers and pull the banana out. And when it was over, your hands were covered with their very, very sticky saliva. And the keeper that I was with, she's like, we gotta go wash your hands right away. If you don't wash your hands, that will be like glue and it will force your fingers to be stuck together. So super, super sticky saliva. I've been licked by a lot of different animals in the animal kingdom. And anteater saliva is by far the stickiest. Giraffes and okapis are probably next. But giant anteaters have super sticky saliva, and it was starting to glue my fingers together. But super cool experience to be able to feed a giant anteater. The Phoenix Zoo also had a really great exhibit for their giant anteaters, and they exhibited them with another animal from the grassland area of that northern Argentina area of South America. And that animal is called a maned wolf. And that sounds like it's a little crazy, right? To have an anteater in with something that's a wolf when that's a potential predator. But the anteater's bigger. It's longer, it's stronger, and it has those sharp claws. And the anteaters were actually kind of the boss in that exhibit. And the maned wolf would stay out of their way. But it was super cool to see those 2 animals interact on occasion in their exhibit at the zoo. It was big enough that they could usually stay out of each other's way, which was very good. Both animals are kind of solitary in nature and don't spend a lot of time interacting with other species anyway. But they do come from the same environment, and they would occasionally cross paths out in the wild. During my time at the Los Angeles Zoo, we did have an anteater there, but by the time we got that anteater, it lived in a whole other section of the zoo, and I worked mostly with hoofed animals, so I could see it on occasion, but I did not work closely with it. I did see it from time to time. And they actually had that anteater in with some monkeys for a while, and the monkeys pretty much stayed up top on branches and vines, and the anteater kind of roamed down on the ground. You can bet though, if the monkeys dropped any of their fruits like bananas or avocados, the anteater would come along and eat those up. Super cool information about anteaters. I'll be sharing more information later today on the Facebook profile, so make sure you check that out. And as always, feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and share any of my information across Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube with any of your family or friends or others who may be interested in learning a bit more about animals. Also, you can always check out, if you've missed an episode of Critter Chat, they will all get uploaded to my website at jeremythezooner.com, where you can rewatch any episodes you may have missed. That's what I have for you today, so I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared. Until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, be safe, have fun. See you tomorrow.